The members in the gallery, I should start by saying this is not a resignation statement. That was last week. This week is a return to my normal business as an ordinary backbencher, carrying out the scrutiny of business. I thought it'd be rather mundane until I walked into what appears to be this rhetorical firefight we've had so far in the debate. But before I come back to that, the taxation cross-border trade bill and its partner, the trade bill coming tomorrow, are vital pieces of legislation. In the newspapers of the weekend, I read that some people were so cross with the white paper that they were proposing to vote against this. Well, I don't think they can be much more cross than me with the white paper, but I do urge them not to vote against it. These are vital pieces of legislation, and they are necessary, whether we have the government's white paper policy, my old white paper policy, the FTA that some have talked about, or indeed even the World Trade Organization outcome. In every single case, we need these bills, and therefore I will be supporting them. Now, I want to speak, however, directly to the new clause proposed by my right honourable friend, the member for Roxburgh. I will do so without impugning anybody's motives, questioning whether somebody is interested in the national interest or not, and I will not be firing any jibes off. I'm not quite sure who she was referring to when she talked about having an excessive attachment to public office, but I don't think it was me. The simple truth is that this is a vitally important argument. It is central to the whole question of the economic aspects of Brexit. Brexit's not just economic, it's democratic as well, but it's central to that. And I will put to one side in my arguments the fact that being out of the customs union was actually in the Conservative Party's manifesto, and therefore one which, in theory at least, we are committed to. Now, the arguments go right to the heart of the principal issues. The proponents of the new clauses, they have a clear belief in the national economic interest, but they clearly believe that being outside the customs union will lead to a precipitate loss of trade, and believe that the loss of ability to make trade deals matters less than that potential loss of trade. That's the core of the argument. It is pretty straightforward in that respect. Now, let's look at some facts. Back in 1999, the United Kingdom, in goods, because we're talking about customs union, so goods, was exporting 60% of its goods to the European Union, 40% to the rest of the world. Since then, that's gone down by approximately 1% per annum, so now it's about 45% to the European Union and the rest to the rest of the world. Pretty much by the end of this decade, it's likely to be 60-40 in favour of the rest of the world. So the prospect of staying inside the customs union, because it takes away the right to your own commercial policy, the prospect of staying inside is favouring the shrinking minority of our trade over the expanding, fast-growing majority of our, expanding majority of our trade. And that's a very simple, fundamental, initial point we should take on board. It also presumes that being outside the customs union... In 1 second, I will. Yes, let's finish the sentence. It also presumes that being outside the customs union will significantly damage trade because there will be friction at the border. I give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful, my honourable friend. One of the most remarkable features of the last 20 years has been the globalised economy and the very rapid growth and emergence of major new emerging markets. So inevitably, the balance of our trade was going to grow with them and decline with the European Union. But it's no way to... We want to remain as attractive to investors from the new economies as the old. It does us no advantage in our dealings with China, Brazil, India to damage the value of our access to the European market. It's outside events that have altered this balance. It's not a failing of our EU arrangement.
My honourable friend was being uncharacteristically inattentive, because that's exactly what I said. Because of the growth in world trade, that's what's going on. And he's exactly right that the fast growth in world trade is one which we should take a great interest in ourselves, because we are best placed probably of most countries in the world to take the most advantage of that. But also within his comment was a presumption, which I was about to address, that the friction on our trade with the European Union will cause enormous damage. Low friction, but friction will cause enormous damage. Let me get, I'll give way for once. I'll have to constrain this because of the time limit, but I'll give way once more.
I'm very grateful for my right honourable friend. Would you confirm that there are many successful manufacturing businesses in Britain today who have these just-in-time supply chains, bringing in large quantities of raw material and component from outside the EU through a system of authorised economic operators, electronic manifests and settlement of any bills not at the port? There aren't people sitting in boxes in the port taking the money.
My right honourable friend is exactly right. It's an issue I'll return to in a second. But before I do, I just want to make a point about this friction. The presumption in all of this is that we have a magical, frictionless system at the moment. Well, actually, we'll have seen on our television screens that that is not true, because this entire House will have watched Operation Stack in progress during the course of various years in the past. Operation Stack is what we do when one of the ports gets locked up for one reason or another, strike in France or whatever. Operation Stack has been operated 74 times in 20 years. In 2015, it took about 31 days of friction. So, and our businesses, the just-in-time businesses, the perishable goods businesses, all coped with it. So let's not frighten ourselves when doing this negotiation. Let's not frighten ourselves. Nobody wants it. Nobody likes that, but they cope with it. That brings me to the point that my honourable friend, actually, in fact, the honourable gentleman for Dover pointed out, of course, that with World Trade Organization facilitation, we will actually minimise the friction on trade through these ports, as indeed was reinforced by my right honourable friend who spoke just now. Now, secondly, while people understandably focus on some of the pressure points in this, most particularly Dover, which we heard about a second ago, they forget that there is strong competition between the ports in the North Sea and the ports on the Channel. Zeebrugge and Antwerp and Rotterdam all want to increase their throughput at the cost of the Calais-Dover crossing. So when we are outside the European Union, they are already preparing for increases in throughput in their own areas and preparing for the increase in work, because there will be some increase in work. But again, as my honourable friend says, that won't happen at the border. It'll happen before they get there, or it'll happen after they pass through it. So our so-called dependency on French ports will turn out to be illusory. Thirdly, in support of the argument that, say, any friction at the border is unacceptable, we hear lots of talk about supply chains. We had it from my right honourable friend who proposed this clause. The simple truth is that they ignore the fact, as was pointed out by the Honourable Member for Harwich, I think, they ignore the fact that lots of international supply chain operations operate across borders where there are customs, tariff, currency arrangements. And I happen to know one of them very well, because I operated a business across just such a border myself, between Canada and the USA. Through the most difficult, and I went back last year to indeed respond. No, I'm not going to give away now. I went back last year to look at it again, and yes, it was 15-year-old technology. Actually, it could be better now. It could be faster. But what happened in Detroit, the centre of the American motor industry, the centre of the American motor industry, and there is in Ontario, across a very difficult, constrained border, tougher than Dover, there is an entire industry supplying parts, components, engines for that motor car industry. And it operates across a border which actually has tariffs on it too. And bear in mind that nobody in this negotiation, no, if you'll forgive me, because I'm short of time. The simple truth is they operate even where there are tariffs, and we are proposing a non-tariff arrangement. There will be no tariffs here. The primary concerns will not be the collection of money. It will be other things that we have to. No, he'll forgive me. She'll forgive me. The issues that remain at the border will depend on the customs policy we decide on, and that is very, very clearly going to alter how that border operates. It includes rules of origin, as already been pointed out, tariff paid status if we are in the future customs arrangement. That's more difficult, actually, than rules of origin. and regulatory compliance. None require action at the border. So all can be dealt with by electronic pre-notification or pre- or post-audit, either at origin or destination. Now, the most difficult issue in this negotiation relating to borders has been Northern Ireland. No doubt about that. There's no way, however, that a UK government is ever going to install a hard border in Northern Ireland. That is plain as a pikestaff. No UK government would risk the peace process that has been going on for decades.
Not required.
Neither will the Irish government. I cannot imagine in a century that an Irish government would do that either. What many people forget, however, is that there is already a border there. There's a currency border, there's a VAT border, there's an excise border, there's other tax borders. So they are operated north and south of the border by the British or the UK and the Irish tax collection and customs collection organisations operating together using intelligence-led intervention. Much is made of 300 border crossings. One of the outstanding issues with the customs being outside the customs union, as somebody has said, is the issue of rules of origin. But in Northern Ireland, there may be 300 border crossings, but there are only 6 ports. So rest of world imports can actually be surveilled and controlled very straightforwardly. So the issue there, which has got much more difficult since it's become politicised, it was actually working quite well in the negotiation before it became politicised, is eminently soluble. Soluble by technical means, soluble by cooperation between the two states. Yes, I'll give way to her.
I'm very grateful to him for giving way. If what he says is so about the border, then why was he part of the government that agreed to the backstop last December?
Well, they didn't agree to the backstop. They agreed to the joint report, which said full alignment. And she'll remember, well, if she wants to listen to the answer, she'll remember we stand at a dispatch box and say we interpret full alignment as outcome alignment and relating directly to the issues in the north-south strands. Principally agriculture, transport, environment as it applies to the single electricity market. Those are the primary ones. And they are soluble, eminently soluble, by arrangements that already exist in Northern Ireland. For example, the carve-out on environmental legislation. So that's a very straightforward issue. It's been blown up, of course, into something else by the other side of the negotiations. But to come back to the point, the risks and costs of having a customs border are less than is being claimed. And what we're being given up to join a customs union is much more than is imagined. The European Union is a slow and not very effective negotiator of free trade agreements. We keep hearing about their negotiating power, their size. Actually, the fact that they represent 28 different countries means they come up with suboptimal outcomes all the time. And actually, we're the country that does least well out of the European Union's free trade agreements. They almost never involve services, for example, our primary trade. So the EU is slow, it's not very effective negotiator of trade deals. But we will be smaller, of course. But many, many countries that are smaller than us do very, very good trade deals. Switzerland's a very obvious example, and it's much more effective than ours. We're bigger, remember, by the way, when we talk about how small we are, we're bigger than the bottom 18 European countries put together. So we're not small by any normal measure of the word. We also have huge advantages over and above our economic weight. We have the English language, we have English law, we're leaders in life sciences, artificial intelligence, internet, medicine, a whole series of areas. And we are one of the leading countries in terms of intellectual exports. Services encompasses intellectual exports. And in that, the English language is the most powerful weapon possible. Yeah. So what this proposal would do is try and deal with a problem which is less bad than they think, and in doing so, throw away a power, throw away a right, which is incredibly important, much, much more important, they think. They are trying to defend a false past and giving up a real future. There we go. Yeah.